In the summer of 1945, a single ship carried a secret so heavy it would end a world war. They called her the Queen of the Pacific. She delivered the sun to the doorstep of Japan, and in return, the ocean demanded a sacrifice so terrifying that for decades the men who survived it refused to speak of the nights they spent in the black water. To the Navy, she was a triumph of American steel, speeding toward victory without an escort. But to the 900 men left floating in the silence of the Philippine Sea, she became a ghost story. They traded the safety of a battleship for a 4-day nightmare where the enemy wasn't a soldier with a gun, but the thirst in their throats, the madness in their minds, and the shadows circling beneath their feet. We have all heard the legends of the sharks, but the true horror of the USS Indianapolis isn't just what happened in the water, it is how a system designed to protect these men simply erased them from the map. So, settle in. Let's drift back to July 1945 to witness the sinking of the grandest ambition of the war and the quiet, desperate courage of the men the world forgot to save. The Pacific Ocean does not bargain. It does not offer distinct terms of surrender, nor does it recognize the rank of the men who traverse it. In July of 1945, the waters between Guam and the Leyte Gulf were calm. To the eye, the surface was a flat, endless sheet of hammered iron, reflecting a sun that burned with a white, indifferent intensity. But beneath that surface, the ocean is a graveyard of infinite depth. It is a place where history is swallowed whole. To understand the darkness that was about to unfold, you must first look at the machine. The USS Indianapolis was not just a ship. She was a titan of the pre-war Navy, a heavy cruiser that carried the pride of a nation in her riveted steel plates. She was a vessel of diplomacy and destruction, a floating city that had hosted President Roosevelt, a greyhound of the sea designed for speed and overwhelming firepower. She was 610 feet of American industrial might, and to the nearly 1,200 men on board, she felt unsinkable. She felt permanent. But in the summer of 1945, permanence was an illusion. The war in Europe had crumbled into ash and tribunal hearings, but the war in the Pacific was bleeding into a horrific stalemate. The Indianapolis was chosen for a mission so secret that the captain himself was not told the full truth of what lay inside the heavy wooden crates lashed to the deck, or the strange lead-lined canister welded to the floor of the flag lieutenant's cabin. The crew saw the Marines standing guard. They saw the officers whispering in the corridors, their faces tight with the anxiety that didn't match the routine nature of a transport run. They sensed the weight of the silence. There was no escort. There were no destroyers flanking them to hunt for submarines. There was just the Indianapolis, sailing alone into the vast, blinding blue, carrying the components of the weapon that would soon incinerate the city of Hiroshima. They had delivered the sun. They had dropped off the uranium and the firing mechanism at the island of Tinian, accomplishing a feat of logistics that would end the war. And having delivered death, they turned their bow toward Leyte, expecting rest, expecting training, expecting that the most dangerous part of their journey was over. It is here in the quiet lull of the mission's completion that the tragedy begins, not with an explosion, but with a feeling, a complacency born of exhaustion. The date is July 29th. The heat is suffocating. Even with the ship cutting through the water at 17 knots, the air below decks is heavy, thick with the smell of bunker oil, sweat, and unwashed bodies. It is a Sunday. The mood is relaxed. The ship is sailing through what is known as the pedestrian route, a lane of ocean considered safe, far behind the front lines. But safety is a relative concept in war. High above on the bridge, the decisions are being made that will seal the fate of every man on board. The visibility is poor. The night is overcast, the moon hidden behind thick, drifting clouds. Because of this darkness, the order is given to cease zigzagging. Zigzagging is a defensive dance. It is the rhythmic, jagged turning of a ship to throw off the aim of enemy torpedoes. It is tedious. It consumes fuel. It slows progress. And on a night this dark, with no intelligence reports of enemy submarines in the area, the command believes it is unnecessary. They choose speed. They choose the straight line. The Indianapolis straightens her wake, becoming a perfect, predictable shadow gliding across the black water. Down below, The men are unaware of the geometry of their vulnerability. They are simply trying to sleep. Among them is Robert Ernest. He is young. In the grand calculus of the war, he is an ordinary sailor, a small cog in the massive engine of the Navy. He has a life waiting for him back in the States, a family, a future, the simple, quiet things that men dream of when they are surrounded by steel and salt. He writes letters that speak of the heat, of the boredom, of the feeling that the war is winding down. To him, the Indianapolis is a ride home. It is a fortress. On this night, the heat in the berthing compartments is unbearable. The ventilation struggle to push the stagnant air around. Many sailors take their bedding topside, sprawling out on the steel deck under the open sky, hoping for a breeze. It is a common practice. It is cooler up there. But Ernest stays below. Perhaps he is too tired to move. Perhaps he prefers the familiarity of his bunk. It is a small choice, a trivial decision. In the chaotic logic of survival, these small choices are the only things that matter. He closes his eyes. The vibration of the engines is a lullaby, a constant reassuring hum that says the ship is alive, the ship is moving, the ship is safe. He does not hear the other sound. Miles away, submerged in the crushing pressure of the deep, a predator is listening. The I-58 is a machine of the Imperial Japanese Navy. She is a B-3 type submarine, large, heavily armed, and commanded by Mochitsura Hashimoto. Hashimoto is not a fanatic. He is a professional. He is a man of precise calculation, a hunter who understands the patience required to kill giants. He has been patrolling these waters for days, finding nothing but empty waves. Then a blip, a silhouette against the faint ambient light of the horizon. Hashimoto raises his periscope. He sees the dark shape moving in a straight line. He cannot believe his fortune. A capital ship, unescorted, not zigzagging. It is a target that defies the rules of engagement he has come to expect from the Americans. It looks like a trap, but the sonar confirms the rhythm of the screws. It is just one ship, alone in the night. He orders the tubes flooded. He does not fire one torpedo. He does not fire two. He calculates the spread. He prepares a salvo that is designed not just to damage, but to break the spine of the target. The distance closes. The Indianapolis, blind and deaf to the danger, steams directly into the crosshairs. The time is just past midnight. The watch changes. Men are stumbling from their bunks to their stations, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Men are coming off duty, heading to the mess hall for coffee, or to their racks for sleep. Robert Ernest is asleep. At 12:14 a.m., the world ends. The first torpedo strikes the bow. It is not a thud. It is a concussion that travels through the steel frame of the ship faster than the sound travels through the air. The explosion tears 40 feet of the Indianapolis's nose clean off. The ship shudders violently, a massive metallic groan that knocks men from their feet and throws sleepers from their bunks. A moment of confusion. A heartbeat where the mind tries to reject what has happened. Then, the second torpedo hits. This is the killing blow. It strikes midship, directly under the powder magazines and the fuel tanks. The explosion is apocalyptic. A column of fire and water erupts into the night sky, higher than the bridge. The concussion incinerates everything in its immediate radius. Steel bulkheads inches thick are ripped apart like wet paper. The ship loses all power. The lights die. The reassuring hum of the engines is replaced by a terrifying silence, broken only by the screaming of twisting metal and the screaming of men. Robert Ernest wakes up in hell. The darkness is absolute. The air is instantly filled with the acrid, choking smoke of burning oil and cordite. The ship is already listing, tilting sharply to the starboard side. Gravity has changed. The floor is becoming a wall. In the corridors there is panic, but it is a muted, claustrophobic panic. Men are trapped. Hatches are jammed. The communication systems are dead. The order to abandon ship cannot be broadcast to the entire crew. It has to be passed by word of mouth, shouted from man to man in the smoky blackness. Ernest moves. Instinct takes over. He scrambles through the tilted passageways, fighting the angle of the deck. He can hear the water rushing in, a roar that sounds like a freight train. The ocean is invading the ship. 12 minutes. That is all the time they have. It usually takes hours for a ship of this size to sink. But the Indianapolis has been gutted. She is drinking the ocean in massive gulps. She is rolling over. On the deck, it is chaos. Men are jumping without life jackets. Men are sliding down the hull, tearing their skin on the barnacles. The propellers, massive bronze blades, rise out of the water like the wings of a dead god, hanging in the air for a terrible moment. Ernest makes it to the rail. The water is close now. The ocean, which had seemed so far down just minutes ago, is rising to meet him. The surface is covered in a thick black blanket of fuel oil. It coats everything. It burns the eyes. It fills the nose. He jumps. He hits the water and goes under, the oil slick coating him, sealing him in. He kicks upward, breaking the surface, gasping for air but inhaling the fumes of the fuel. He swims. He swims away from the suction of the dying ship. He turns back to look. The Indianapolis stands vertical. For a moment she pauses, perpendicular to the water, a tombstone silhouetted against the dark clouds. Then, with a final rushing exhale of trapped air, she slides beneath the surface. Gone. In 12 minutes, a floating city has vanished. The silence that follows is heavier than the explosion. The ocean churns for a moment, bubbling and frothing, and then it settles. The waves return to their rhythmic motion. The darkness closes in. Robert Ernest is treading water. He is surrounded by debris, crates, nets, shell casings, and hundreds of other men. They are calling out to each other. Names, ranks, cries for help. The voices drift across the black water, small and fragile against the vastness of the Pacific. Is anyone there? Help me. I can't swim. Where is the ship? There is no ship. There is only the oil. It burns the skin. It gets into the throat, inducing vomiting. It blinds them. They are scattered. The current begins to take hold immediately, pulling groups apart. Some men have life jackets, the kapok vests that become heavy when wet. Others have nothing. They cling to floating ammunition crates, to empty powder cans, to each other. They wait for the rescue. Surely the distress signal went out. Surely the Navy knows. A ship like the Indianapolis does not just disappear. There will be planes at dawn. There will be destroyers by lunch. They just have to hold on. But the distress signals were not heard, or they were ignored, or they were dismissed as a trick of the enemy. The radio shacks were destroyed too quickly. The power failed too fast. The Indianapolis is missing, but nobody knows she is missing. There is no pin on a map in a headquarters in Guam marking their location. There is no alarm ringing in Washington. As the adrenaline fades, the cold begins to set in. The water is 85 degrees, warm by ocean standards, but it is colder than the human body. It steals heat slowly, insidiously. Hypothermia is a clock that has already started ticking. Robert Ernest floats in the darkness. He bumps into a body that does not move. He pushes it away. He finds a group of sailors clinging to a floater net, a large mesh net used for cargo. He grabs hold. The night stretches out. It is the longest night of his life. The shock keeps the terror at bay for now. They are alive. That is the only thought that processes. They are alive and the ship is gone. They do not know that they are floating above a trench that is thousands of feet deep. They do not know that the blood and the thrashing and the noise of the sinking have sent a vibration through the water, a dinner bell ringing into the abyss. They do not know what is coming with the sunrise. For now, there is only the oil, the salt and the silence. The grand ambition of the atomic age is resting on the bottom of the sea. The men who carried it are left to drift. Act 1 is over. The machine has failed. The reality of the ocean is about to begin. The sun rose on the first day, not as a savior, but as a revelation, when the sky lightened, turning from charcoal to a bruised purple, and finally to a blinding hard white. The men of the Indianapolis could finally see the scope of their world. It was a world of 3 colors, the blue of the deep ocean, the white of the breaking crests, and the black of the fuel oil that coated everything. Robert Ernest floated in a thick slurry of it. It was in his hair, matting it to his skull. It was in his ears, muffling the sounds of the ocean. It clogged his nostrils, a constant chemical stench that masked the smell of the sea. When he blinked, his eyelids scraped against his corneas, gritty and slick. He looked around. The ocean was littered with the debris of the wreck, a trail of garbage stretching for miles. But among the crates and the paper cups and the floating chairs, there were heads. Hundreds of them. They bobbed in the swell like buoys. Some were clustered in tight knots, men holding onto each other's life jackets, forming human rafts. Others were drifting alone, pushed away by the whims of the current. The mood was strangely optimistic. The shock of the night had faded, replaced by the pragmatic logic of the military mind. They were the Navy. They were a high-priority vessel. They were overdue. The logic dictated that the radio distress signal had been received, that the silence of the night was simply the time it took for the machinery of rescue to spin up. They scanned the horizon, expecting the silhouette of a PBY Catalina seaplane or the grey hull of a destroyer. "They'll be here by noon," an officer shouted. His voice was hoarse but confident. "Conserve your energy. Stay together." Ernest treaded water. He checked his life jacket. It was a kapok vest, filled with plant fibers designed to float. It felt solid now, buoyant and reassuring. He didn't know that kapok was only rated for 48 hours of saturation. He didn't know that the clock on his buoyancy was already ticking down. The morning passed. The sun climbed higher. With the light came the visitors. At first they were just shadows, dark shapes moving deep beneath the dangling feet of the sailors. They were curious. They glided effortlessly, unbothered by the currents that the men fought against. They were oceanic white-tip sharks. The white-tip is not like the coastal sharks that nip at swimmers in the surf. It is a pelagic hunter. It lives in the desert of the open ocean where food is scarce. Because of this, it is an opportunist. It does not fear. It investigates. It tests. The first interactions were subtle. A sailor would feel a bump against his leg, a rough texture brushing against a thigh, a sudden turbulence in the water nearby. Then the fins broke the surface. They were distinct, mottled with white at the tips, cutting through the oil slick with terrifying precision. The men froze. The splashing stopped. Instinct kicked in. They knew, without being told, that movement attracted attention. "Quiet," someone whispered. "Don't kick." The sharks circled. They were analyzing the vibrations. In the water, a thrashing man sounds like a dying fish. It is a dinner bell. The sharks were confused by the oil, by the taste of the fuel in the water, but they were driven by a hunger that was millions of years old. The first attack did not happen with a roar. It happened with a scream that was cut short. A sailor, drifted slightly apart from a group, was suddenly jerked downward. He didn't have time to shout a warning. He just vanished. One moment he was there, his face pale and terrified, and the next there was only a swirling eddy of red froth mixing with the black oil. Then the red was gone, and the ocean was blue again. The men nearest to him recoiled, scrambling backward in the water, splashing in panic. The splashing drew more fins. Panic is a contagion. In the water, it is fatal. As the men thrashed to get into the center of the groups, they kicked those on the outside. The groups became defensive circles, the wounded and the strong fighting for the safety of the middle. Robert Ernest watched a fin slice past him, no more than 3 yards away. He pulled his knees to his chest. He made himself small. He stopped breathing. The shark passed. It was looking for easier game. It was looking for the blood that was already in the water. By the afternoon, the sharks had established a perimeter. They patrolled the edges of the floating groups. They fed on the dead first, the bodies of men who had succumbed to injuries from the explosion. But as the day wore on, they began to test the living. But the sharks were not the only enemy. As the sun reached its zenith, the true torture began. The heat on the equator is a physical weight. It hammered down on the exposed heads of the survivors. There was no shade. There was no respite. The reflection off the water doubled the intensity, cooking the skin from below as well as above. Thirst arrived. It started as a dryness in the throat. Then it became a sticky, desperate craving. The body, losing fluids to sweat and the immersion in salt water, began to demand replenishment. The ocean is cruel. It surrounds you with water, cool, clear, inviting water that you cannot touch. To drink it is to die. The salt concentration in the ocean is 3 times higher than that of human blood. When you drink it, your kidneys cannot process the salt. They demand more water from your body's cells to flush it out. The more you drink, the faster you dehydrate. It is a paradox of biology. Robert Ernest watched the man next to him. The sailor's lips were cracked and bleeding. His tongue was swelling, filling his mouth like a dry sponge. "Just a sip," the sailor mumbled. His eyes were glassy. "I just need a sip to rinse my mouth." "Don't do it," Ernest said. His own voice sounded like grinding stones. "It'll kill you." The sailor stared at the water. It looked so clean beneath the oil. He cupped his hand. He brought it to his lips. He drank. For a moment he looked relieved. The cool liquid soothed the burning throat. But within minutes the chemistry took over. The thirst returned 10 times worse. The cramps began. The delirium set in. This is the salt madness. It does not take days. In the heat, under the stress, it can happen in hours. The brain, starved of water and poisoned by sodium, begins to misfire. By late afternoon, the hallucinations started. The man who had drunk the water began to scream. He wasn't screaming about sharks. He was screaming about the ship. "It's down there," he shouted, pointing into the abyss. "The ship is just below us. The drinking fountains are still on. The scuttlebutts are flowing with ice water. I can see them." He tore off his life jacket. He believed it. He believed it with every dying neuron in his brain. "I'm going to get a drink," he said, and he dove. He swam down, straight down, chasing a mirage of plumbing and cold steel. He never came back up. Perhaps he drowned. Perhaps the sharks waiting in the shadows below took him. To the men on the surface, he simply chose to leave. As evening approached on the first day, the dynamic of the survivors changed. The hope of immediate rescue began to fray. The horizon remained empty. The officers, men like Captain McVeigh, who were drifting in their own isolated groups, tried to maintain order. They organized water watches. They tried to tie the rafts together. But the ocean is too big for order. The currents are invisible rivers within the sea. They pulled the groups apart. A cluster of 50 men would drift a mile away from a cluster of 100. Communication became impossible. Robert Ernest found himself in a group that was shrinking. The camaraderie of the morning was replaced by a suspicious guarding of space. Men were terrified that a thrashing neighbor would attract the landlords, as they started calling the sharks, and the sharks were learning. They realized that the large, dark masses on the surface were not whales or debris. They were composed of individual edible units. They stopped circling and started bumping. They would ram a sailor from below, knocking the wind out of him, testing for weakness. If the man fought back, they retreated. If he went limp, they bit. The sun began to set. If the day was a torture of light and heat, the night was a torture of the mind. The temperature dropped. The water, which felt tepid during the day, now felt freezing against the sunburned skin of the men. Teeth chattered. Muscles locked up in cramps. The kapok vests, now soaking up water for nearly 20 hours, sat lower in the sea. The men had to work harder to keep their chins above the waves, and the visibility vanished. Darkness in the middle of the Pacific is total. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. You cannot see the horizon. You cannot see the sharks, but you can hear them. Robert Ernest floated in the black void. He closed his eyes, trying to conserve warmth. Splash. A scream. Silence. It happened again and again. A sudden eruption of water, a terrified plea for help, and then nothing. The imagination filled in the gaps. Every brush of a piece of drift against a leg felt like the sandpaper skin of a shark. Every wave that broke over a head felt like a mouth closing. The psychological toll of the second night was heavier than the first. On the first night, they were survivors of a sinking ship. On the second night, they were prey. The men began to pray. The prayers were not quiet. They were loud, desperate bargains with God. They promised to be better men. They promised to go to church. They promised to never drink whiskey again. They recited the Lord's Prayer in a disjointed chorus that drifted over the waves. Our Father who art in heaven. The chanting seemed to keep the madness at bay. It was a rhythm, a structure. But then the screaming would start again. Robert Ernest felt a body press against him. It was a young kid, maybe 18. He was shivering so violently he was vibrating the water around them. Are they coming? The kid whispered. Do you think the planes are coming? Ernest looked up at the stars. The Milky Way was a brilliant, indifferent slash of diamond dust across the sky. The beauty of it was insulting. Yes, Ernest lied. They're coming. Just hold on until morning. I'm so thirsty, the kid said. I'm so thirsty. Don't drink the water, Ernest said automatically. It was a mantra now. I won't, the kid said. But do you hear that? Hear what? The engines. I hear a plane. Ernest listened. He strained his ears against the lapping of the waves. He wanted to hear it. He wanted it to be true so badly that he almost manufactured the sound in his own mind. But there was nothing. Only the wind. Only the water. I don't hear it, Ernest said. It's there, the kid insisted. It's right there. The kid lifted his head, searching the empty sky for a salvation that existed only in his dying mind. The second night stretched on. It felt like a year. The cold seeped into the marrow of their bones. The fatigue was narcotic. To sleep was dangerous. If your head slumped forward, you inhaled salt water. If you inhaled salt water, you coughed. If you coughed, you thrashed. If you thrashed, the sharks came, so they stayed awake. They held each other up. They slapped each other's faces. Stay with me, Ernest said to the kid. What's your name? Tell me your name. James, the kid whispered. My name is James. Tell me about home, James. And so they talked. They built a world of words to replace the world of water. They talked about porch swings and cold milk and the smell of cut grass. They talked to keep the silence away, because in the silence you could hear the chewing. By the time the sky began to grey with the approach of the second dawn, the group was smaller. The perimeter had tightened. The men in the center were the lucky ones. The men on the edges were gone. Robert Ernest watched the sun rise again. He dreaded it. He knew what it brought. It brought the heat. It brought the sight of the empty horizon. It brought the realization that the Navy wasn't coming. The machine had truly broken. They were no longer sailors. They were biology fighting against geology. They were meat fighting against time. And they were only halfway through. Day 3. If the first 48 hours were a trial of the body, Day 3 is the execution of the mind. The sun rises again. It is punctual. It is relentless. By now, the men are no longer recognizable as the clean-shaven, white-uniformed sailors who left Guam. They are caricatures of humanity. Their faces are blackened by the oil, but where the oil has washed away, the skin is blistered and raw, peeling in long, translucent strips. Their lips are swollen so large that many cannot close their mouths. Their eyes are slits, crusted shut with salt and pus. Robert Ernest is drifting in a state of semi-consciousness. He is dehydrated to the point where his blood has thickened. It moves through his veins like sludge, struggling to carry oxygen to his brain. And this is where the reality breaks. On the third day, the ocean stops being an ocean. To the starving brain, the shimmer of the heat haze on the horizon looks like solid forms. It looks like structure. It begins with a whisper, a murmur traveling through the cluster of men. The ship didn't sink. The words are spoken with absolute conviction. It's just below us, a quartermaster says, his voice raspy but clear. It's hovering. The galley is open. I can smell the biscuits. It is a contagion, a shared psychosis. In a group of 100 men, 50 of them suddenly see the same thing. They look down into the indigo deep, and they do not see the void. They see an island. They see a hotel. They see the Indianapolis resting on a shelf of coral, lights blazing, inviting them in. I'm going down, a sailor says. He unclips his life jacket. He is not suicidal. In his mind, he is making a rational choice. He is going to the mess hall. He slips under. He does not struggle. He swims down with purpose until the pressure or the lack of air claims him. Ernest watches this. He hears the splash. He sees the empty space where the man was. A part of him wants to follow. The logic is seductive. Why suffer in the sun when relief is just 10 feet down? But something anchors him, a fragment of discipline, a memory of home that is stronger than the hallucination. He recites his address. He recites the names of his family. He uses the truth as a shield against the mirage. But the madness is not always peaceful. By mid-afternoon on the third day, the paranoia sets in. The thirst has become a violent animal. Men begin to believe that others are hiding water. "You've got a canteen!" a man screams, lunging at the sailor next to him. "I saw you drink from it. Give it to me." There are no canteens. There is nothing but the sea. But the accusation is enough. A fight breaks out. It is a slow-motion brawl, men too weak to punch, grappling with each other, shoving heads underwater. The water churns. The noise travels. And the sharks return. They have been there all along, shadowing the drift, but the commotion triggers the instinct to strike. The water turns red. The fighting stops, replaced by the collective gasp of horror. But even the horror is dulling. The capacity to feel terror is a finite resource, and they are running dry. As the sun begins to set on day 3, the physical equipment of survival begins to fail. The Kapok life jackets are made of plant fibers sealed in plastic. They are rated for 48 hours of buoyancy. It has been nearly 70 hours. The fibers are waterlogged. The jackets are losing their lift. Men realize they are sinking. To keep their heads above the surface, they have to tread water constantly. But they have no energy left. This forces a terrible calculus. In the groups, there are men who have died during the day. Their bodies are still in their jackets, bobbing alongside the living. But there are also men who are comatose, hovering on the threshold. They are dead weight. They lean heavily on the shoulders of the men next to them, dragging the group down. Robert Ernest finds himself supporting a man he does not know. The man is unconscious. His head lolls forward, face in the water. Ernest pulls him up. The man is heavy, a wet, dense burden. Ernest's legs are burning. He knows that if he holds on, he will go under. He looks around. He sees others making the choice. An officer, weeping silently, unties the knot on a dead man's jacket. He pushes the body away. The jacket slides off. The body sinks slowly, spiraling down into the dark. Ernest looks at the man in his arms. Is he breathing? It is hard to tell. The chest does not move. The skin is grey. "I'm sorry," Ernest whispers. The words are just air. He has no voice left. He lets go. The man drifts away. He does not sink immediately. He floats face down, a dark shape joining the trail of debris that stretches for miles behind them. Ernest feels a surge of guilt, sharp and biting, but it is instantly replaced by the physical relief of buoyancy. He rises an inch higher in the water. He can breathe. Survival is a series of subtractions. Night 3 falls. It is the worst night yet. The hallucinations of the day turn into the nightmares of the dark. The temperature drops again. The men huddle together, not for comfort, but to keep the sharks at bay. They are a floating organism of shivering flesh. Ernest drifts in and out of a coma. He dreams of ice. He dreams of a faucet dripping in a porcelain sink. The drop forms, swells, and falls. Drip. He tries to catch it with his tongue, but he wakes up with a mouthful of salt water. He retches, his stomach cramping violently, bringing up nothing but bile. When the 4th day breaks, the screaming has stopped. There is a profound silence over the ocean. It is the silence of absence. Of the nearly 900 men who went into the water, hundreds are gone. The groups have been decimated. The large clusters have broken apart, shredded by currents and shark attacks, leaving small isolated bands of survivors scattered over 20 miles of ocean. Day 4 is the day of the long drift. The currents here are capricious. Robert Ernest is now with a group of only 10 men. They are strangers. The faces he knew from the first day are gone. They are drifting apart from the main body. They are specks on a canvas of blue. The sharks are still there, but they are less aggressive. They have fed. They circle lazily, huge and patient. They know the men are dying. They can wait. The sun is no longer an enemy. It is simply a fact. The men do not look at it. They hang in their waterlogged jackets, heads bowed, staring at their own feet dangling in the abyss. Then, a cloud formation appears on the horizon. It is low and dark. It looks like a mountain range. "Land," someone croaks. He points a trembling finger. "It's Leyte. I see the trees." It is a cloud, just a cumulus build-up, heavy with rain that will never fall on them. But to the desperate eye, it is salvation. 3 men detach themselves from the group. They possess a sudden, manic energy, the last reserves of adrenaline stored in the adrenal glands. "We can swim it," one they say. "It's only a few miles." "Don't go," Ernest thinks, but he does not say it. He cannot speak. His tongue is a swollen obstruction in his throat. The men start to swim. They use a clumsy, splashing overhand crawl. They swim toward the clouds. They swim away from the group, away from the only safety that exists. Ernest watches them go. He watches their heads bobbing in the distance, getting smaller and smaller. They are swimming toward nothing. They will swim until their hearts explode, or until the sharks take them. They do not turn back. By noon they are gone. The horizon is empty again. Ernest is alone in his mind now. The group is just bodies bumping against him. He stops believing his senses. If he sees a ship, it is a lie. If he hears a voice, it is the wind. He retreats inward. He begins to prepare for the end. It is not a panic. It is a resignation. He thinks about the letter he wrote. He wonders if it was mailed. He wonders if his mother will get the telegram before or after the package with his personal effects. He feels the cold creeping up his legs even in the midday sun. His heart rate is slowing down. Thump, pause, thump, pause. He is entering the final stage. The body is shutting down the non-essential systems. Digestion, sensation, complex thought. They are all turned off to keep the heart beating for 1 more hour. 1 more minute. The ocean is calm. The water is glass. It reflects the sky perfectly, so there is no up or down, just an infinite sphere of blue. Robert Ernest is floating in the center of the universe, forgotten by God and the Navy. He closes his eyes. The shadow of a bird passes over his face. He does not flinch. He assumes it is another hallucination. He does not know that it is a PV-1 Ventura patrol bomber. He does not know that the pilot, Lieutenant Chuck Gwynn, is currently wrestling with the controls, looking down at an oil slick that shouldn't be there. He does not know that the silence is about to be broken. But for now, on the afternoon of the 4th day, Robert Ernest is dead. He is technically alive, his heart is beating, but the man he was is gone. What remains is a husk, drifting, waiting for the transition to be complete. The sun begins to lower, the shadows lengthen. The sharks turn inward, sensing the twilight. The engine of the PV-1 Ventura is a loud, droning baritone, a mechanical noise that usually signifies danger to men in the water. But on the morning of Thursday, August 2nd, it sounded like a choir. Lieutenant Chuck Gwynn was flying a routine anti-submarine patrol. He was not looking for survivors. He was looking for the enemy. He was looking for periscopes. At 10:25 a.m., his eyes caught a shimmer on the ocean surface. It was an oil slick. To a pilot's trained eye, an oil slick usually means a submarine has just dived, venting fuel to adjust its buoyancy. It is a sign of a target. Gwynn banked the plane. He dropped down. He opened the bomb bay doors. He was preparing to kill. But as the plane roared lower, skimming just a few hundred feet above the waves, the texture of the oil slick changed. It wasn't just a smear of chemical iridescence. It was inhabited. Gwynn saw the black dots. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. He saw the splashing. He saw men waving. For a moment his brain refused to process the data. There were no reports of a sinking in this area. No distress calls. No missing ships. The ocean was supposed to be empty. Then the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. These were not enemy combatants. These were Americans. He pulled up, retracted the bay doors, and keyed the radio. "I'm circling large oil spot," he broadcast. "Many men in water. Send assistance." He did not know who they were. He did not know he was looking at the crew of the Indianapolis. He only knew that the ocean was full of ghosts, and they were still alive. Down below, Robert Ernest heard the plane. He did not look up. He had been tricked by the wind and the clouds too many times. He kept his head down, his chin resting on the disintegrating collar of his life jacket. But then, the plane did something impossible. It dropped a smoke flare, then a life raft. Then it dipped its wings, rocking back and forth in a clear, deliberate signal. "I see you." The realization rippled through the scattered groups of survivors. It wasn't a cheer. They didn't have the breath for cheering. It was a collective sob, a release of tension so profound that some men simply let go and died right there. Their job of waiting finally finished. But the rescue was not instant. The machine of salvation is heavy and slow. Hours passed. The sun began to set again. The sharks, sensing the change in energy, the sudden frantic hope of the prey, became aggressive. That is when Lieutenant Adrian Marks arrived in a PBY Catalina, a clumsy boat-hulled seaplane. He saw the sharks attacking. He saw the men being pulled under even as help was circling above. Marks made a decision that would end his career, but save his soul. He defied standing orders. He lowered his landing gear into the open ocean. The swell was 12 feet high. Landing a plane in that water was suicide. It was like landing on concrete speed bumps. He came in hard. The hull slammed against the waves, rivets popping, metal groaning. But he stayed afloat. He taxied into the slick. "Get on," his crew shouted. They pulled men out of the water. They stacked them inside the fuselage like cordwood. When the cabin was full, they put men on the wings. They tied them to the struts with parachute cord. The plane became a floating ambulance, overloaded, sinking lower, unable to ever fly again. But it was a solid thing in a liquid world. Robert Ernest was pulled from the water by the hands of a stranger. He didn't feel the grip. His skin was so soft, so macerated by 4 days of immersion, that the flesh sloughed off his arms where they grabbed him. He didn't scream. He was too far gone. He was laid on a canvas stretcher. He felt the vibration of a deck beneath him. Not water. Solid. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 96 hours, he slept without fear of drowning. The counting began the next morning. The USS Doyle, the USS Bassett, the USS Ringness, the destroyers had finally arrived, their searchlights cutting through the darkness of the previous night like the fingers of God. They combed the ocean for miles. They found bodies, hundreds of them. They found empty life jackets. They found half-eaten remains. And they found the living. They brought them to the hospitals on Peleliu and Guam. The doctors were horrified. They had seen combat wounds, bullet holes, shrapnel tears, burns, but they had never seen this. The men were skeletal, their tongues were black. Their bodies were covered in ulcers from the salt and the oil. They hallucinated for days. They hoarded water cups under their pillows, terrified that the nurses would take them away. Then came the math. 1,195 men went into the water. 316 came out. 879 men were dead. It was the greatest loss of life at sea in the history of the United States Navy. And it had happened in silence. As the survivors lay in white sheets, recovering their humanity 1 ounce of water at a time, the machinery of the Navy began to spin in a different direction. It shifted from rescue to damage control. The war was ending. The atomic bomb, the very cargo the Indianapolis had delivered, was dropped on Hiroshima 4 days after the rescue. The world was cheering. The mushroom cloud filled the front pages. The victory was absolute. The Navy could not allow the story of the Indianapolis to stain the perfection of the surrender. A tragedy of this magnitude, caused by negligence, by a failure to track a capital ship, by a refusal to send an escort. It was an embarrassment. Someone had to be blamed. And the system does not blame itself. They blamed the captain. Charles McVay III was one of the survivors. He was a man of honor, a second-generation admiral's son. He had done everything by the book, but the book was being rewritten to hang him. The court-martial of Captain McVay is a stain on the legacy of American justice. He was charged with hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. The trial was a spectacle. The Navy needed a conviction so badly that they did the unthinkable. They brought the enemy to testify. Mochitsura Hashimoto, the commander of the Japanese submarine I-58, was flown to Washington, D.C. He stood before the tribunal, a former enemy in a room full of victors. He was asked through a translator if zigzagging would have saved the Indianapolis. Hashimoto looked at the Americans. He was a professional. He knew the geometry of the kill. "No," he said, "I would have hit him anyway. Zigzagging would not have mattered." It was the truth. But the court did not want the truth. They wanted a verdict. McVay was found guilty. He was stripped of his seniority. His career was over, but the punishment was not professional, it was personal. For years, the families of the dead men, who had been told that McVeigh was responsible, sent him hate mail. They called him a murderer. They sent him Christmas cards wishing him death. The Navy had given them a villain to hate, so they wouldn't hate the Navy. Robert Ernest came home to a world that didn't understand. He took the train back to the Midwest. He watched the cornfields roll by. The green was overwhelming. The earth felt too solid under his feet. He walked into his parents' house, the smell of pot roast, the radio playing big band music, the dog barking. "You're home," his mother cried. "You're safe." He couldn't speak. How do you explain the sound of a shark's teeth snapping shut on bone to a woman standing in a clean kitchen? How do you explain the choice to let a man sink? So he didn't. Like many of the 316, Robert Ernest swallowed the ocean. He kept it inside. He went to work. He got married. He mowed the lawn. But at night, the water came back. He would wake up sweating, his hands clutching the sheets, thrashing against a current that wasn't there. He couldn't take baths. He couldn't go to the beach. The sound of water lapping against a dock could induce a panic attack that would leave him gasping for air. He was a hero in his town, but he felt like a ghost. The men who died were the heroes. He was just the guy who didn't drown. For decades, the story of the Indianapolis was a footnote. It was overshadowed by the bomb, by the surrender, by the rebuilding of the world. The Navy kept the files classified. The public moved on, but the survivors did not move on. They began to find each other. In the 60s and 70s, they started holding reunions. They would meet in hotel ballrooms in Indianapolis. It was a strange gathering. These were old men now, with grandkids and pensions, but when they looked at each other, they didn't see the suits and the ties. They saw the black oil. They saw the young faces of the boys who didn't make it. Captain McVeigh came to one reunion in 1960. He stood by the door, unsure if he would be welcomed. The survivors, the men who had actually been in the water, didn't hate him. They knew. They knew he was in the water with them. They knew he had been sacrificed. They lined up to shake his hand. They saluted him. But forgiveness from his men wasn't enough to silence the voices in McVeigh's head. The letters from the grieving mothers never stopped coming. The weight of 879 souls is too heavy for one man to carry. In 1968, Charles McVeigh walked out into his snowy garden in Litchfield, Connecticut. He held his service pistol, and he finally stopped the zigzagging. He was the last casualty of the USS Indianapolis. It would take another 30 years for the truth to be fully declassified. It would take a 12-year-old boy doing a history project in the late 90s to spark the movement that finally exonerated Captain McVeigh. Congress passed a resolution. The Navy cleared his record. But justice delayed is just a paperwork correction. It does not bring back the dead. Robert Ernest lived to see the exoneration. He lived to see the memorial built in Indianapolis, a limestone monument with the names of every sailor etched into the rock. He would visit the wall. He would run his fingers over the names: James, Smith, Richardson. He would touch the names of the men he held in the water, the men he prayed with, the men he watched drift away. He is old now. The war is ancient history, a black and white reel in a digital world. But when he closes his eyes, the colors are still vivid: the blue, the red, the black. He realizes now what the true horror of the Indianapolis was. It wasn't the sharks. The sharks were just animals, doing what nature designed them to do. They were innocent in their hunger. The horror was the silence. It was the silence of the radio rooms that missed the messages. The silence of the officers who decided a zigzag wasn't necessary. The silence of the ocean that swallowed a city of steel without leaving a trace. And the silence of the years that followed, where the system protected its reputation over the truth of its sailors. The Indianapolis teaches us a cold, hard lesson. We build machines to conquer the world. We build ships to conquer the sea. We build bombs to conquer our enemies. We believe in our dominance. But the ocean does not care about our machines. It does not care about our ranks or our medals. If you turn off the engine, if you stop the motion, if you let the system fail, the water is always waiting. Robert Ernest stands by the memorial. The wind blows through the city streets, far from the sea. He buttons his coat. He is safe. He is dry. But a part of him never left the water. A part of him is still floating, drifting under the hot sun, waiting for a plane that might never come. He walks away, into the noise of the living. Behind him, the stone names remain silent, guarding the story of the ship that delivered the sun and then vanished into the dark. This story is not about sharks. It is about the fragility of the systems we trust to keep us safe. It is about how quickly a civilization of steel and protocol can dissolve into a primitive struggle for breath. The sharks ate the bodies, but the bureaucracy ate the truth, and in the end the ocean kept them both.